Hi there, and welcome back to Riella's Army of Dolls, where I talk all things fashion doll. And today I'm going to be demystifying lots of the different abbreviations that go with doll collecting, as well as outlining some of the tricks and traps that people can fall into when they're looking at that advertising. Just note first of all that what I'm not going to do is go in depth into any of the acronyms that go with specific doll brands. There are so many of them out there, we could go on forever. So for example, Barbie has, a ton of acronyms very specific to Barbie, such as TNT for twist and turn or M2M for made to move. There are lots of them. If you are interested in those, you're going to need to look up the specific dolls. The only ones related to types of dolls that I do want to talk about are the acronyms that go with BJD. BJD is such a widely used term that I think it's really important to understand it. BJD stands for ball jointed doll. I have talked in other clips about what a ball jointed doll is. So that is a doll that is strung with elastic and literally has a ball connecting the two parts of each joint. When you see BJD, it is usually going to mean a resin doll that is made in that way. And there are a few acronyms that go along with types of BJDs. So if you see a BJD, then that's going to be an Asian ball jointed doll. Those are the most common types of BJD out there. The majority of them are made in Asia, but not all of them anymore. There's also FBJD, which stands for fashion ball jointed doll. I've already had a look at those on my channel before, but for that we're talking about dolls that have a fashion doll figure but are made in the same way as a ball jointed doll. We also have several different types of ball jointed dolls with acronyms that relate to the size of the doll. So the most common ones in there are SD, that stands for Super Dollfie. These ones come from the original Volks company's definition of what their dolls were, and that was a 60 centimeter tall BJD. And so now if you see SD, it isn't necessarily a Volks doll that's being described. It could be any 60 centimeter BJD. MD or MSD is a mini Dollfie or a mini Super Dollfie, and that is generally a 40 centimeter or 1/4 scale doll. Yo SD is a smaller doll that is a 1/6 doll or a roughly 30 centimeter BJD. Another category that has a ton of abbreviations is the condition of the dolls. And this is a really interesting one because a lot of people will use these terms without really knowing what they mean and being a little bit flexible with them. So it's important as a buyer to understand the terms, but also to really view auctions and sales with an intelligent eye. So starting from the best condition, going to the worst condition. NRFB, that stands for never removed from box. So that should be a doll that has never been taken out and has probably got all its plastic and the box still sealed. For example, if we're talking about a vintage doll, we do want to still see that wrapper on. If the wrapper isn't on, then the doll might well no longer be never removed from box. If we're talking about a more modern doll that comes presented in a collectible way, then we want to see the strings still attached and the doll with its hairnet appearing to have never been removed. Note, a lot of sellers don't actually check for those things. If they receive a doll that looks to be in good condition, they may write NRFB without actually checking it. So make sure that you have a look at those pictures and look for that. In terms of a doll that is in essentially perfect condition but may have been removed from its box, we have quite a few terms that go with that. Sometimes people will just write mint. Sometimes you're going to see MIP, mint in packet, MIB, mint in box, or NIB, new in box. Now, all of those really mean a doll that looks like it is new. It may appear to be never removed from box, but the seller can't be sure. Or it may have been removed from its box and put back in, but done very neatly. So in terms of the ones I showed before, something like this doll, if the wrapper was off, she might be listed as mint in box, MIB. Sometimes a seller might also write appears NRFB for a doll that is mint, and so they might say it appears to be never from box, but they can't assure it. We can also get dolls that are mint but don't have a box, so we can write MNB or MNP for mint no box or mint no packet, or MC for mint and complete. Now if you see that written, then that at least should be a doll that appears to be brand new. It looks brand new. When we say mint, we mean something looks brand new, but it no longer has its box or packet. So for example, a doll like this Tulabelle here, we can see that she still has the wrap on her legs. Nothing has been changed. So she is MNB, mint, no box. I like using for most sales NM, meaning near mint. Basically, you're going to use that to mean a doll that we can't guarantee is perfect, but looks it to the eye. Shouldn't be anything obviously wrong. Sellers will also use excellent, sometimes just written like that, or sometimes written EXC to mean the same thing. They feel like the doll is great condition, but they can't guarantee that it's mint, so they're going to write NM or excellent. Next one down is VG, pretty straightforward that means very good. But what we mean by a doll that is very good is we mean that there might be something that we can visibly see isn't perfect with this doll. So if we're talking about a Tonna doll, for example, this could be a doll that has slightly loose joints or a small stress mark on the shoulder, or it might be a doll whose vinyl on the clothing is starting to disintegrate, but still looks pretty good. So we're going to write VG or very good for that. G or good, and sellers will often write good, but they will sometimes shorten it to G. It's one of those euphemisms that we use. By the time we get to good, we actually mean something that isn't in that good condition. So in that way, it is a bit of a euphemism. So be careful when you're looking and buying something that is listed as good. We actually are qualifying that it is a doll that doesn't fit into the very good or excellent category. So it's going to have a flaw that is visible. So that might be very messy hair, or it might be, you know, small marks or scratches. Some sellers will be more generous and some sellers will be less generous about the term good, but you really need to be careful. And going down from that, the next one is TLC. This is most commonly used to mean something that is poor condition. So again, it is a euphemism. TLC standing for tender loving care. Occasionally sellers will write poor or P, but it's pretty uncommon. Normally they're going to use TLC as a euphemism for poor condition. And so what they mean is something that is actually broken, missing parts, is really going to need to be fixed. If it is a doll, that might mean obvious cracks. It might mean a broken piece. It might mean missing parts. It might mean tears, hair falling out, hair cut, that they've been drawn all over them. If something is listed as TLC, you know that it needs work. That said, again, some sellers are more generous and some are less generous. I actually quite often buy TLC listings knowing that a lot of the time I can actually fix the flaws with them. And so you can get some really good deals, but really be careful if it says TLC. Now, when the sellers are listing those doll specifics, they are hopefully going to use an abbreviation for its condition, but they're also going to potentially list other specifics, and those can again be euphemisms and difficult to understand. So one of the most common ones is HTF, or sometimes VHTF, which is hard to find or very hard to find. Sellers will also write rare, but it depends. Now, personally, when I use those terms, I use rare to mean something that is highly limited, and there really aren't many out there, whereas HTF, or hard to find, I would use to mean a doll that actually there was a reasonable number of them released, but it has become very sought after for whatever reason. So dolls like the Lara Croft doll from Honor would be hard to find, but are not actually rare. They are really hard to find and expensive now, but actually there were quite a few released. Sometimes sellers will also use those terms just to make their product seem more appealing. They will write hard to find on something that might be incredibly easy to find. And so use your own judgment. I actually really dislike terms like hard to find because it doesn't really mean anything. But quite often sellers will use that term just for something that's fairly old. And actually, it might not be hard to find at all. So use your judgment rather than the seller's judgment on whether an item is hard to find or rare. Going along with that, we have the abbreviation LE, which stands for limited edition. Now, this should really only be used if a doll release is genuinely limited, if there is a specified number that doll came out with. So that is the definition of a limited edition. Now, please note that if a limited edition is, say, 1,000, actually that's not very rare. In the doll world, that is a pretty large limited edition. But if the limited edition gets down to about 200 or less, then that is a doll that is very rare. And most often, when sellers use LE, they're going to write the number of the release. So LE 200 or LE 500. And again, they're going to use that as a claim that the doll is rare or hard to find. So again, use your judgment. If it says LE 2000, well, actually that is not a very rare doll. That is pretty common. But if we get down to a small number, then that is a significant thing to know about the doll you're buying. Along with that, we have the abbreviation COA, which stands for Certificate of Authenticity. Now, when a doll is limited, generally speaking, you want it to come with a COA. So you should be looking in the description for it to say includes COA or comes with COA. If it doesn't, that might be okay. It depends on who it's made by and, you know, what type of doll it is as to whether the COA is going to affect the value. When we're talking about a one-of-a-kind doll, usually the COA is quite important. And when we're talking about BJDs, again, it is very important because there are a lot of fake versions of them. And so without the COA, you may actually find it very hard to make a sale. You also risk buying a doll that is a fake. The other one that goes along with is OOAK, which stands for one of a kind. Sometimes sellers will make a mistake with this one and just write OAK. That is simply a mistake and it means exactly the same thing. What one of a kind means is that something has been customized by the seller or by a previous customizer. Generally speaking, we're talking about a repaint or a reroute. It could also be redressing and making a whole one-of-a-kind package. So a doll that has a new paint, new hair, new clothing, new shoes, things like that. Just be aware this one can also be a bit of a trick because sometimes sellers will use the term one of a kind to mean a doll that has actually just had its hair cut or slightly restyled, or even something that has been played with by a child and redressed and just had messy hair. I've seen some really bad suggestions of what might be one of a kind. So sellers will use that term to make it sound like it is special and unique, but occasionally it will actually be put on an item that is the opposite. You know, it's just been treated badly. So look at the pictures, don't just read the word and assume that OOAK means that something is really desirable. It should, but it won't always. All of the abbreviations I've talked about so far are really common on eBay auctions and on sales sites, but we've also got a whole lot of abbreviations that are specifically used for social media and for listings we'll find there. So for example, abbreviations that describe what kind of sale we're making could be BIN, buy it now. That one's used on eBay as well, and that just means that the price is the immediate purchase price. Buy it now, that will get you the doll with no auction, with no bidding. We also have abbreviations starting with F for, FAFSFT, for auction, for sale, for trade. That just defines how the seller wants to sell their doll. With the same abbreviations, we will also sometimes see NFS, which is not for sale. That one is particularly used on social media when people are posting an image and they don't want to sell it. It's their own doll, but they want to avoid confusion. People who are in search of a particular doll will use alternative abbreviations for that. So usually starting with W for wanted, WTB, wanted to buy. WTS, wanted to sell. WTT, wanted to trade. And so some of those are pretty much exactly the same. You might see FS or you might see WTS, and they are saying the same thing, an item that is for sale. Other ones that are used when people are searching for something are often the abbreviations ISO or DISO, meaning in search of or desperately in search of. Just depends what people, like, whether they add the D on the start, or sometimes people will have an in search of list and they'll put at the top their ones that are DISOs over the ones that are ISOs because they're the ones they want most. Finally, we've got the abbreviation OBO, which means or best offer. So if people have a price, but they are willing to accept less, they might write, for example, $200 OBO. And generally speaking, if they write that, they're not expecting to get the full price. So whenever I see something listed as OBO, I am thinking, okay, what would I offer? When people are posting on social media, they also use other abbreviations that aren't directly related to the sale. So some that often confuse people are the abbreviations PM and DM, which mean exactly the same thing. They mean private message or direct message. It really just depends who the person is and what platform they're on as to which one they prefer. All that means is if you want more information, send them a message. People might also use the term OT on social media, which means off topic. The reason they would use that is if you're, for example, posting on a group dedicated to Monster High and you want to do a post about Barbie. It might be related, but it isn't actually on topic. It is a different topic from the primary board goal. So you write OT and hope that that means the moderators will let you post it. And then we've got a couple that relate to when people do their own work. Sometimes people will write WIP on an image. That means work in progress. So generally that means that they're aware that they haven't finished their product. They don't want to get negative comments because, it isn't quite good enough. So they're making it really clear that they've got more work to do to finish it up. And the final one that people will post about their own work is OC, which means original character. And that means that they've designed their own creation. So again, if we're doing something like Monster High and we're not doing one of the core characters, we're using those ideas to create something that is different, then we're going to call that our OC, our original character. So they're all abbreviations that are used widely across the whole doll world and usually can be applied to pretty much any doll that you want to talk about. There are loads more that are specific to particular brands, but as I said, I wouldn't be going into those. If you wanted to hear about any particular brands, then you can let me know and I will do another video about abbreviations that you can use about those doll brands. But hopefully this has demystified some of the lingo that you have been seeing when you're looking at all those different posts.